Chapter 19. Thomas Robinson lifted his bad arm to raise it on the Bible to give his oath. It slipped off, and the judge growled, "That'll do, Tom." Tom was 25 years old, and he was married with 3 children. We also found out that he had once been in trouble with the law. He had received 30 days in jail for disorderly conduct. "It must have been disorderly," said Atticus. "What did it consist of?" "Got in a fight with another man. He tried to cut me." "Did he succeed?" "Yes, sir. A little. Not enough to hurt. You see, Tom moved his left shoulder. "Yes," said Atticus. "You were both convicted?" "Yes, sir. I had to serve, 'cause I couldn't pay the fine. Other fellow paid his." "Were you acquainted with Mayella Violet Ewell?" asked Atticus. "Yes, sir. I had to pass her place going to and from the field every day." "Whose field?" "I picks for Mr. Linkdee's." "Were you picking cotton in November?" "No, sir. I works in his yard fall and winter time. I works pretty steady for him all year round. He's got a lot of pecan trees and things." "You say you had to pass the Ewell place to get to and from work. Is there any other way to go?" "No, sir. None's that I know of." "Tom, did she ever speak to you?" "Why, yes, sir. I'd tip my hat when I'd go by, and one day she asked me to come inside the fence and bust up a chifferobe for her." "When did she ask you to chop up the chifferobe?" "Mr. Finch, it was way last spring. I remember it because it was chopping time, and I had my hoe with me. I said I didn't have nothin' but this hoe, but she said she had a hatchet. She gave me the hatchet, and I broke up the chifferobe. She said, 'I reckon I have to give you a nickel, won't I?' And I said, 'No, ma'am, there ain't no charge.' Then I went home. Mr. Finch, that was way last spring, way over a year ago." "Did you ever go on the place again?" "Yes, sir." "When?" "Well, I went lots of times." There was murmuring in the courtroom, but it died down quickly. "Under what circumstances?" "Please, sir?" "Why did you go inside the fence lots of times?" "She'd call me in, sir. Seemed like every time I passed by yonder, she'd have some little somethin' for me to do. Choppin', kindlin', totin' water for her. She watered them red flowers every day." "Were you paid for your services?" "No, sir. Not after she offered me a nickel the first time. I was glad to do it. Mr. Ewell didn't seem to help her none, and neither did the children. And I know she didn't have no nickels to spare." "Where were the other children?" "They was always around, all over the place. They'd watch me work. Some of 'em set in the window." "Would Miss Mayella talk to you?" "Yes, sir. She talked to me." It came to me, as Tom was testifying, that Mayella must have been the loneliest person in the world. She was even lonelier than Boo Radley, who had not been out of the house in 25 years. She didn't understand when Atticus asked her if she had any friends. She thought he was making fun of her. She couldn't be like Mr. Dolphus Raymond, because she didn't have a lot of money for people to overlook the fact that he lived with Negroes. Tom Robinson was probably the only person who was ever decent to her. But she said he took advantage of her, and when she looked at him in court, she looked down upon him like he was dirt beneath her feet. "Did you ever," Atticus said, "at any time, go on the Ewell property? Did you ever set foot on the Ewell property without an express invitation from one of them?" "No, sir, Mr. Finch, I never did. I wouldn't do that, sir." "Tom, What happened to you on the evening of November 21st of last year?" Everyone leaned forward and drew in their breath. "Mr. Finch," he said, "I was going home as usual that evening, and when I passed the Ewell place, Miss Mayella were there on the porch, like she said she were. It seemed real quiet like, and I didn't quite know why. I was studying why, just passing by, when she waves for me to come there and help her a minute. Well, I went inside the fence and looked around for some kindling to work on, but I didn't see none, and she says, 'Nah, I got something for you to do in the house. The old door's off its hinges, and fall's coming on pretty fast.' I said, 'You got a screwdriver, Miss Mayella?' She said she sure had. Well, I went up the steps, and she motioned me to come inside, and I went in the front room and looked at the door. I said, 'Miss Mayella, the door looks all right.' Then she shut the door in my face. Mr. Finch, I was wondering why it was so quiet like, and it come to me that there weren't a child in the place, not a one of 'em. And I said, 'Miss Mayella, where the children?' I said, 'Where are the children?' he continued, and she says, she was laughing sort of, she says they all gone to town to get ice creams. She says, 'Took me a slap year to save 7 nickels, but I've done it. They're all gone to town.'" Tom felt uncomfortable. "What did you say then, Tom?" asked Atticus. "I said something like, 'Why, Miss Mayella, that's right smart of you to treat 'em.' And she said, 'You think so?' I don't think she understood what I was thinking. I meant it was smart of her to save like that, and nice of her to treat 'em." "I understand you, Tom. Go on," said Atticus. "Well, I said I best be going. I couldn't do nothin' for her. And she says, oh yes I could. And I ask her what. And she says to just step on that chair yonder and get that box down from the top of the chifforobe." "Not the same chifforobe you busted up?" asked Atticus. "No, sir, another one. Most as tall as the room. So I done what she told me, and I was just reachin' when the next thing I know she'd grabbed me round the legs. Grabbed me round the legs, Mr. Finch. She scared me so bad I hopped down and turned the chair over. That was the only furniture disturbed in the room, Mr. Finch, when I left it. I swear before God." "What happened after you turned the chair over?" Tom Robinson came to a dead stop. He glanced at Atticus, then to the jury, and Mr. Underwood sitting across the room. "Tom, you're sworn to tell the whole truth. Will you tell it?" Tom ran his hand nervously over his mouth. "What happened after that?" "Answer the question," said Judge Taylor. "Mr. Finch, I got down off of that chair and turned around, and she sort of jumped on me." "Jumped on you? Violently?" "No, sir, she hugged me. She hugged me around the waist." The crowd got loud again, and Judge Taylor used his gavel to get order. "Then what did she do?" "She reached up and kissed me on the side of the face. She says she never kissed a grown man before, and she might as well kiss. She says that her papa do to her don't count. She says, 'Kiss me back.' I say, 'Miss Mayella, let me out of here,' and tried to run, but she got her back to the door, and I'd have had to push her. I didn't want to harm her, Mr. Finch, and I say, 'Let me pass.' But just when I say it, Mr. Ewell yonder hollered through the window." "What did he say?" Tom Robinson swallowed again, and his eyes widened. "Something not fit to say, not fittin' for these folks and children, you hear?" "What did he say, Tom?" You must tell the jury what he said." Tom Robinson shut his eyes tight. "He says, 'You goddamn whore, I'll kill ya.'" "Then what happened?" "Mr. Finch, I was running so fast I didn't know what happened." "Tom, did you rape Mayella Ewell?" "I did not, sir." "Did you harm her in any way?" "I did not, sir." "Did you resist her advances?" "Mr. Finch, I tried. I tried to 'thout being ugly to her. I didn't want to be ugly. I didn't want to push her, or nothin'." It occurred to me that Tom Robinson's manners were as good as Atticus's in their own way. I did not understand Tom's situation. He would not have dared strike a white woman under any circumstances and expect to live long. So he took the first opportunity to run, which made him look like he was guilty. "Tom, go back once more to Mr. Ewell," said Atticus. "Did he say anything to you?" "Not anything, sir. He might have said something, but I weren't there." "That'll do," Atticus cut in sharply. "What did you hear? Who was he talking to?" "Mr. Finch, he were talkin' and lookin' at Miss Mayella." "Then you ran?" "I sure did, sir." "Why did you run?" "I was scared, sir." "Why were you scared?" "Mr. Finch, if you was like me, you'd be scared too." Mr. Link Dees stood up from his seat in the courtroom and announced, "I just want the whole lot of you to know one thing right now. That boy's worked for me 8 years, and I ain't had a speck of trouble out of him. Not a speck." "Shut your mouth, sir!" Judge Taylor roared. "Link Dees, if you have anything you want to say, you can say it under oath and at the proper time. But until then, you get out of this room. You hear me? Get out of this room, sir. You hear me? I'll be damned if I listen to this case again." Judge Taylor told the reporter to take out what Link had said, and told the jury to disregard the interruption. It was now Mr. Gilmer's turn to ask Tom questions. "You were given 30 days once for disorderly conduct, Robinson?" asked Mr. Gilmer. "Yes, sir." "What did the look like when you got through with him?" "He beat me, Mr. Gilmer." "Yes, but you were convicted, weren't you?" Atticus spoke up and sounded tired. "It was a misdemeanor, and it's in the record, Judge." "Witness will answer, though," said Judge Taylor, just as wearily. "Yes, sir, I got 30 days. Mr. Gilmer was letting the jury know that a man who was convicted of disorderly conduct could easily have taken advantage of Mayella Ewell. "Robinson, you're pretty good at busting up chifferobes and kindling with one hand, aren't you?" "Yes, sir, I reckon so." "Strong enough to coax the breath out of a woman and sling her to the floor?" "I've never done that, sir." "But you are strong enough to?" "I reckon so, sir." "Had your eye on her a long time, hadn't you, boy?" "No, sir, I never looked at her." "Then you were mighty polite to do all that chopping and hauling for her, weren't you, boy?" "I was just trying to help her out, sir." "That was mighty generous of you. You had chores at home after your regular work, didn't you?" "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you do them instead of Miss Ewell's?" "I done 'em both, sir." "You must have been pretty busy. Why?" "Why what, sir?" "Why were you so anxious to do that woman's chores?" "Looked like she didn't have nobody to help her, like I says." With Mr. Ewell and 7 children on the place, boy? Well, I says it looks like they never help her none. You did all this chopping and work from sheer goodness, boy? Tried to help her, I says. Mr. Gilmer smiled grimly at the jury. You're a mighty good fellows, it seems. Did all this for not 1 penny? Yes, sir. I felt right sorry for her. She managed to try more than the rest of 'em. You felt sorry for her? You felt sorry for her? Mr. Gilmer asked, shocked. Tom realized his mistake, but the damage was done. Mr. Gilmer paused a while and let what was said sink in. Now, you went by the house as usual, last November 21st, he said, and she asked you to come in and bust up a chifforobe. Is that right? No, sir, it ain't. Then you say she's lying, boy? Atticus was on his feet to say something, but Tom didn't need him, and said, I don't say she's lying, Mr. Gilmer. I say she's mistaken in her mind. Didn't Mr. Ewell run you off the place, boy? No, sir, I don't think he did. Don't think? What do you mean? I mean, I didn't stay long enough for him to run me off. You're very candid about this. Why did you run so fast? I says I was scared, sir. If you had a clear conscience, why were you scared? Like I says before, it weren't safe for any to be in a fix like that. But you weren't in a fix. You testified that you were resisting Miss Ewell. Were you so scared that she'd hurt you, you ran, a big buck like you? No, sir. Scared to be in court, just like I am now. Scared of arrest. Scared you'd have to face up to what you did? No, sir. Scared I'd have to face up to what I didn't do. Are you being impudent to me, boy? No, sir. I didn't got to be. I didn't hear any more, because I had to take Dill out of the courtroom. He had started to cry and couldn't stop. Jem said if I didn't go with him, he'd make me. Reverend Sykes said I ought to take him out too. Ain't you feeling good? I asked. Dill tried to pull himself together. Mr. Link Dees was at the top step of the courthouse. Anything happening, Scout? He asked as we went by. No, sir, I answered. Dill here, he's sick. We went to sit under the shade of the tree. Dill said, it was just him I couldn't stand. Who? Tom? That old Mr. Gilmer, doing him that-a-way, talking so hateful to him. Dill, that's his job. Why, if we didn't have prosecutors, well, we couldn't have defense attorneys, I reckon. I know all that, Scout. It was just the way he said it made me sick, plain sick. He's supposed to act that way, Dill. He was cross. He didn't act that way when... Dill, those were his own witnesses. Well, Mr. Finch didn't act that way to Mayella and old man Ewell when he cross-examined them. The way that man called him boy all the time and sneered at him and looked around at the jury every time he answered. Well, Dill, after all, he's just a Negro. I don't care 1 speck. It ain't right. Somehow it ain't right to do him that way. Hasn't anybody got any business talking like that? It just makes me sick. That's just Mr. Gilmer's way, Dill. He does 'em all that way. You've never seen him get good and down on one yet. Why, well, today Mr. Gilmer seemed to me like he wasn't half trying. They do 'em all that way. Most lawyers, I mean. Mr. Finch doesn't. He's not an example, Dill. He's the same in the courtroom as he is on the public streets." "That's not what I mean," said Dill. "I know what you mean, boy," said a voice behind us. It was Mr. Dolphus Raymond. He peered around the trunk of the tree at us. "You aren't thick-hided. It just makes you sick, doesn't it?"